is being recorded.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on wherever you are, and welcome to today's session. We have a very interesting topic again on continuing on the topic of cloud platform, multi-cloud management, and we will dive deep into the policy aspect of the pack. We have Nick Navarro with us, the offering manager, who will take us through this session. Nick, I'll hand it over to you. Can you please introduce yourself and kick off the session?
Sure. Thank you, Vilkis. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Navarro, and I'm part of the offering management team on the Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Management. I've also been involved in the past with what started as IBM Cloud Private, Cloud Automation Manager. So I have been involved with our hybrid cloud portfolio, and in particular, working to make sure that we have compliance features that meet the various security needs of our customers, enterprises across various industries. So I'm going to focus largely on a policy overview today and help you understand and define the key ways that we drive governance by using policies in the multi-cloud management pack. So we'll probably spend about half of our time on some slides and half of our time on a little bit of a demo, going and actually looking at some of the policies and looking at how our UI is built to support these features. So we'll just go ahead and jump right into it with a policy overview. So if you're not already familiar with the multi-cloud management pack or with MCM, it's the main tooling that provides your deployment of clusters and applications in Kubernetes, and via those mechanisms of deploying and managing containers, we also get visibility into our resources and use policies to govern our configurations, to govern the resources that we put up together. So a few key things that I kind of just want to lay out, and I have these in bullet points, but if you're looking at the chart to the left, the multi-cloud manager operates above other resources, kind of at a top level in this hub, where the multi-cloud manager hub is what deploys your clusters, manages them for you, and lets you deploy applications on top of your managed clusters. So if you're looking at the side, another thing that you're able to do from the hub, and this is really the UI of multi-cloud manager, is you're able to create and manage your security and your configuration policies. So in short, you are setting up your policies and your configuration via the hub, so you can edit, manage, and check your settings from the hub for each of your target clusters that it manages below it. And on the managed clusters themselves, whether it's a private cloud like ICP, whether it's Red Hat OpenShift, or a third-party Kubernetes cluster, on each of those managed clusters is where the policies and the controllers that are built are end up being deployed. So for each of the policies that get deployed, they're composed of various templates. And when we talk about templates, what we really mean is policies are composed of YAML files, and we have created the building blocks or the templates to these YAML files that help define a policy. And so there's various aspects or components to this, from very basic things like a placement policy or a placement rule, which also comes with the binding. And these are basic elements that tell the policy which cluster it's going to apply to, and that makes sure that the placement is bound to that policy. So there are various little aspects, templates or definitions like that we need to understand to get a bigger picture. And another thing on top of that is that the policies and the users here are kind of set up against our role-based access controls. So that also kind of helps manage who and what can be done, or who and what can do or take action with these policies. So moving on to dive a little deeper into some of the concepts around governance and policies. I kind of laid some of the basic elements out in the last slide with how policies are just created at the hub level and pushed to your clusters. Um, but in short, a bigger picture, we've built our architecture to include a policy framework that allows you to create policies um, either completely from scratch and distribute them to your managed clusters as you need them. And that's really where being able to customize and tailor your policies in a YAML file, however a customer needs, uh, is kind of the starting point of value. But what we're also doing is creating a collection of policies, so more policies that come out that are pre-built um, to help define the policy, define and specifically link a policy to uh, specific violations. So, if, for example, if you have a policy that says I need to comply to CIS benchmarks, that's Center for Internet Security, the policy will be linked to details that say, if there's a violation of the CIS policy, then a particular container that it's running on cannot run or needs to be killed and restarted. So there are various aspects that are linked together that we're building out of the box that also bring you to security findings. Um, so all of these elements it can be customized or they can be used kind of as we're delivering them. We're going to be building more policies and building more extensible features of our dashboard, which is where you manage and look at your policies. Today, we have a number of visualizations, tools, kind of overviews of policies and violations and security findings, but those are going to be evolving, and we'll take a look at that once we have a chance to jump into the user interface of the multi-cloud management pack. So going a little bit further on some of the concepts that we've just laid out, I wanted to put this in the frame of our overall architecture. So in our first slide, we started with a very uh, just small view of the MCEB hub in the middle. But as we were getting at before, the MCEB hub is kind of what contains a few key elements our of our policy engine, and the architecture you can see kind of contains all of these different parts. So the main point of value that we've tried to build to make it easy for users to access our policies is a dashboard which surfaces all of your policies and security findings up to one level and contains all those visualizations I was just talking about. And on your managed clusters, like we said before, is where your security policies actually live and run, and where the policy controllers actually operate to do the validation that this cluster or these pods containers meet the policies or do not, and then report the information that it catches back up to the dashboard, and that's all done through our security findings API and these definitions of violations. So these architectural elements are kind of what make our policy engine extensible and configurable for customers, whatever their needs are. So, if a customer really needs to build a lot of customization or integration into their policies, they can do that with our APIs and with some of our backend tooling to say integrate another third party security tool that they want to send or feed security findings and policies from. So that's kind of how the policy engine stacks up together. Things are managed and done from the hub. Your clusters are where these policies actually take action and help govern and enforce things. And in a bigger picture, we've made things extensible to connect to a client security infrastructure, which could include a variety of tools, but we've largely focused on making sure we can integrate with tools from IBM Security. So we're focusing on the security pack that will be coming in the future. We're focused on tools like Splunk. Sysdig is going to be another partner that we're very focused on building some of these integrations with. So there's going to be a lot of points of value for users to be able to make policy and governance very applicable to their requirements. Um, Now, the life cycle that I've kind of explained a little bit already is that policies are created using the hub. You propagate them to the managed clusters, and you build them for your various controls, or you use the out-of-the-box controls that we've already built. And so the controllers, they check every so often to make sure that these containers in my managed cluster are either meeting the specified state that the policy says they need to meet, or they aren't. And it can take two actions based off of what it finds. It can either just report to you, it can inform you in your dashboard of whether you're in violation or not, or it can actually enforce some action. And when we say enforce, it's actually doing some level of auto remediation where it can take down containers that, if they're in violation, they're not supposed to run, or it can restart them to a former state that was compliant. Those are the kind of enforce actions that we're building around and that we have right now, and that remediation is also going to be evolving. Um, so, with all of that information propagated to your dashboard and to the MCM hub in particular, that's where we also have the ability to send this data elsewhere and use it in other places. Like, for example, if that data on a policy and security finding may also be linked to something like an incident, a security incident, that could be linked or tied to our security tooling like QRadar, sending those feeds back and forth so we can get better alerts and better remediation and handling. Uh, Even tools like CEM for event management are things that are going to be tied and eventually linked to policies. Um, and finally, the third party providers are also going to be um, connected and integrated to this, starting with third party partners like Sysdig and others. Those integrations are what we're working on building to provide a wider set of policies, but also if a customer is already working with a third party like Sysdig, they want us to be able to integrate with those policies that third parties have, and they want to be able to use what they've already invested in potentially with other third parties. So that's where we need to be able to integrate and have an extensible framework here. Um, Moving forward, just through some of these details. So uh, as I was explaining earlier in this, a policy is composed of various templates or various pieces. So the basic building blocks in the CRD, those are the resource definitions that Kubernetes understands in our YAML file. We have to define the basic things like what's the name of the cluster this is going to go to and what's the namespace that this policy is going to apply to. Um, there are a lot of various Kubernetes objects that we have templates for that you can also define. So if you have specific networking rules, you can use the policy template we have for that to set some of those networking rules. If this is a pod or set of containers that's running on ICP and you want to set some pod security policies, we have templates on that. If you need to limit the amount of memory, if your resources need to be limited to a particular role using them, these are all objects that we have templates for that are the basic elements that are defined. And then you define the actual security policy on top. So these policy templates you see on the left, these are really the security policies. And on the right here are your configuration policies, is another way to look at it. And we have another chart that summarizes those, and you'll see them in the UI shortly. But for our security policies, for a starting or launching off point, we've built some out of the box ones that are centered on the security services that are available in the multi-cloud management pack. And these are also policies that, for the time being, the way we've largely built them, these also apply and work with IBM Cloud Private directly. And these are really being designed to be extensible and kind of interchangeable and working with, uh, the infrastructure, the foundation layer that we have at the base of the pack. So when we started building this engine, it was part of IBM Cloud Private, and with the pivot to packs that we've been making, some of our security services, and in particular this policy engine, the policy dashboard, these are parts and pieces that are going to live and that are becoming permanent parts of the multi-cloud management pack. So some of these policies, while they're built and work with ICP under the covers at time, this is all really intended to be used from multi-cloud management for managing or Red Hat OpenShift. So that's a big focus infrastructure wise, which is where we get to kind of propagating our policies. Um, right. So we've built our policies at the MCM hub. They need to be propagated down to our managed clusters. So this is where the placement policy and the placement binding that we defined in our first slides dictate where this policy is going to go to which cluster and how that's going to work. And this is where you can also propagate and send to many or all of your clusters if you even need. That's the kind of power that the multi-cloud management pack and that MCM drives. You can take these actions at scale for lots of your resources, not just one cluster. And finally, we touched on that concept of inform or enforce me of what's happening with my policies. So the third element of our flow is when we do have enforcement set up and we need some auto remediation on a policy violation, um, our controller is going to check and validate however often you set in the UI whether my cluster, my containers are being compliant. And if they're not, the enforcement actions that we have built or that you dictate customly can be implemented. And the same goes with these third-party security controls. They'll work exactly the same way that our policies do when they're connected and integrated at this lower level. And in short, what happens with the third-party security provider, they have similar frameworks and architectures for policy as we do. So what we'll do in the back end, we'll map, control X from a third party to control Y from the multi-cloud manager. And in the back end mapping, that's what kind of aligns and feeds their data in a format that the multi-cloud manager understands and can report back up to our dashboard. So that allows us an easy way to bring in data with our partners that our customers are looking for and want as well in certain cases. So um, before I move over to the demo that we're going to do here shortly, I do want to set a few more definitions of concepts that you're going to see in the user interface. So to recap on some things already, in its most basic form, a policy is just a YAML file, a custom resource definition that tells Kubernetes how to manage and govern our clusters and containers. We have within the policy defined a few key elements that help map policies to sets of standards. So we don't just want generic policies on the multi-cloud manager. We know our customers need policies that are aligned to standards like PCI DSS. They're aligned to standards like HIPAA. And there are just a dearth of industry specific standards, of industry specific policies that we need to be able to build against. And so we've been building our out of the box policies to align to various standards. But what you'll see in the UI, we currently have things built in an extensible manner that lets you define what's my standard for this policy, whether it's something from PCI or it can be something from NIST. Um, what's the category of the control that this policy is going to be? So I might have an encryption policy, and that might be related to a category of data protection, um, or I might have a policy for role-based access controls, and that's all about your system integrity. So these various concepts help lay out what the standard, what the family or category of controls is going to look like. And then at the lowest level here is the actual control, where you're defining something technical, so some parameter or element that your cluster or container needs to meet. So this is how we use these kind of annotations. They're definitions that help us define, help us set what the policy is. And these other elements we've touched on a little bit. A namespace selector is needed to tell the policy which namespaces in a cluster it's going to apply to. You have various templates for your role, for your policy, for your objects, and those all just tell Kubernetes how is this resource supposed to act or be used. So those are just some very high-level concepts that I think can uh, help us understand what we're going to look at in the UI. And now I know I see some questions flooding in, and I'm assuming we wanted to save those till the end. So I'm going to just breeze through um, some examples in this slide, and then we'll get to moving to the UI to see some of these. Um, Now, as I kind of mentioned, the YAML file of a security policy looks something like this on the left. Now, creating, um, you know, a wide library of these policies is is kind of something that really is an investment on our part that we've been bridging the gap in by starting to ship out these out of the box policies. So in the multi-cloud management pack today, we have about 20 out of the box policies that can be really implemented based on the way they're built today that help you do and control various security services. So on the right, you'll see a short list of what some of those are. Things like managing your certificates and their expirations are things that we have pre-built controls for. If you are a PCI or working with a federal customer and have those kind of requirements of I need to keep audit logs for X period of time, your audit service needs to be configured and on, and you need to have policies to make sure audit service is on and our logs actually getting sent out of all these things that were mandated to send data about. So these are the kind of things that we've built controls around as a starting point. We've been focused on things like meeting federal NIST security frameworks, PCI frameworks, CIS, Kubernetes, and Docker frameworks. So those have been our jumping off points, in addition to the configuration policies that we kind of started off with, that we built when this was all created as part of ICP, the cloud private side of things. But so to make things easier on customers, we're building more of these policies by default because building these yourselves as a customer, these long YAML files, is something that needs to be automated and easily done from a UI. Otherwise, it can become a very complex process. So that's why we're simplifying things with the UI. I'm not going to focus on this architecture chart too much, but I will say, like I was alluding to before, our policies are focused on the security services that we have here in the middle. So multi-cloud management ships with features around security in these buckets. We can scan your containers. We manage your access into the multi-cloud, or we provide you the IAM, access point, so you as a customer can manage who and what roles people can play in your system. Uh, there's monitoring tools to make sure your code stays secure and properly configured. We have an audit logging service, cert management and key management services, and various others that our policies are built out of the box around. Um, so going off of these elements, I've already kind of touched on some frameworks we're built around. When I did speak to categories previously, one thing was that we focused on NIST categories in particular for a starting point. So we've grouped some of our policies based on these categories, and in the future, we're really going to be doing that with the cybersecurity framework from NIST, since we want customers to have these mappings built out of the box already in the multi-cloud management pack. Today, everything's very customizable, but our UI really provides a jumping off and a starting off point for users to be able to do this in a much more streamlined, easy fashion, rather than creating long policy YAML files that they need to upload into their CLI or terminal. We wanted to give them some avenues to do this via the UI. So to do that, um, either directly acting on your clusters if you need to go work on a particular one, or if you're really looking at a bird's eye view and trying to operate a little bit higher level, you can work into your policies from the governance and risk dashboard. So that's what I'm going to focus on for a little bit here, um, and give you all an overview of how our dashboard looks and operates today, and how policies are created using the UI tooling that we have available right now. So this is the governance and risk dashboard that is available with version 1.1 of the Cloud Pak today. So we've built a very easy framework for customers to see information about the policies that have been deployed across their resources and clouds, and to also see the security findings that are linked to the policies. So if you'll recall, you'll have a policy template, and you will have the controller, and those two elements together are what tell you about your violations. Is something not being controlled? Is it out of violation? And those are what also directly feed your security findings. So if something is in violation, it's going to surface up a finding if your policies are set up to inform you about what's happening. And if enforcement actions are happening, you'll see those as well, and you'll get information about what's occurring in your clusters. So we'll dive into some of our top violations and top security findings shortly, but at a summary, these two tables surface up typically by volume. What are the violations or issues that I'm having most often within my clusters? And you can also drill down a little bit and just view those by what are the particular policies that are having the most issues with clusters being non-compliant. So you'll see that the two clusters I have right here, it appears they're not meeting the CIS policy that I have in place. So the controller has already checked and informed me that I have issues in those two particular clusters. So there's different ways to look at the data, and same with my findings. This is a very top level summary, but in the same clusters, those non-compliant policies on CIS, I'll be able to drill into them from here as well. Now, over here in our radar chart, what we typically can see, and it's a little bit bare right now because we have just a low number of some of our policies set up. But this is another visualization that helps you understand the data you were looking at there. If I have policies with controls that are constantly being violated, you want to surface those up to understand what clusters have those issues and which of those policies are not being met. So aside from the summaries there, you do have these drill downs that help you look at, I have this policy and it's set up to inform me. what standard is it aligned to? So as we noted before, we've built our standards to align to various frameworks and definitions from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they help define things like the frameworks for FISMA and FedRAMP. So these are the kind of security standards we've built our pre-built policies around. If you dive in and look at some of the details here, a lot of the various concepts that we were defining in our charts are what you see visualized here. So as opposed to having a YAML file full of code that somebody needs to look at in a text editor to understand what's going on with my policy, or moreover, if you have to build in a YAML editor, that can become cumbersome if you need to scale to multiple clouds or to hundreds of containers or nodes. So via our UI, where we've pre-built a lot of these policies, we've defined all of those elements already and propagated all of that with the hub into our UI and to the clusters. You see the definitions, like where is this policy supposed to reside as far as a cluster? Where what namespace is this policy supposed to apply to? And all the other elements like the placement policy and its binding. All of that detail is included here, but the detail that we really want to know about when we drill down is if there's a violation, and if you do need to revise things, customize your policies, for example. This is where having the extensible framework of the policy engine is valuable and important, because editing policies becomes much easier with the UI versus the CLI when things are propagated and a little bit easier to read here. And for example, if I needed to just change something like the remediation action, because say this policy is critical and I need more than being informed, I need an enforce action to take place, you can edit very simple elements or complete elements of your policy right here in our YAML editor. So there are various ways to do that. My policy updated really simply. And then what happens, and this is another customizable or extensible feature, is your system will recheck your policies against your clusters and your containers again at a later point. So for real-time live feeds, the quickest types of rechecks happen every 5 or 10 seconds. But if I want to refresh at a lower speed every 30 minutes, just so I'm not capturing as much data, or I'm not overfilling my quota, my resources, my audit logs with all this data, I can alter how often these checks happen. So backing up to some of our policies and cluster violations, I'm just going to dive into some of the details of some of my cluster violations here, and actually show you two different ways to kind of view some of what's going on. So I mean, you can always dive into your clusters, or at least the high level detail views of what's happening from your dashboard. But if you really do want to work on your clusters and try to remediate, that's where navigating to your clusters, actually, doing something like finding your cluster and launching it out from the UI is valuable, so that you can actually go into ICP. So if you're running a managed cluster on ICP, being able to pop out to that to manage the policies, manage the cluster on there, manage some of your security like VA or MA. That's pretty easily done, since these are all interconnected and work together now. The other way that you're really going to want to be able to create and manage your policies on top of your clusters is with the new Create Policy UI feature that has been baked into the 1.1 release. So in the previous forum, I showed you just one simple way on policies that are already deployed to go and edit them. But if you need to create a new policy from scratch, or want to use one of our out-of-the-box templates, this is the new UI form that we've put out to help users do this in a much more simplified manner. So the intent here is really in 6 simple steps I can define my policy, and to finish out I can make sure it's enforced if I have a hard requirement that this policy needs to be met, or if not, leave it as an informed policy that just tells me of violations. So I'm going to just create one of my sample policies here, and you'll see on the right as I type or change these parameters, the YAML file changes over here dynamically, and this is what's going to be implemented. The specification field here is actually where you're able to select from the pre-built out-of-the-box policies that we have available today. So you'll see a quick short list of what's there. And if you recall, these are largely built around the security services we have today. So if I need my policy to check my certificates for expiration, it'll do that. If I need to make sure audits enabled so that all data is being captured about CIS compliance needs, that's covered. And the CIS compliance templates actually go go quite deeper than what you see here, since we had been working on CIS compliance with IBM Cloud Private and Multicloud Manager for the start for the last year. So there's a number of templates around CIS, around making sure the IAM service on the front end or the login is limited to just an admin, and any violations are tracked. And a lot of these things already align to specific requirements from various frameworks. So the various items here, I won't run through the whole list, but they help you ensure a basic hardened configuration of your pack, and that's where we're going to be going more and more in the future. The policies that we're going to be delivering, we're going to be finding more ways to put them out in front of customers so that customers have more secure configurations from day zero. That's the future vision of how these policies will be used. For our purposes here, I just want to create a simple certificate policy for checking that expiration. You'll see here all of that is already set and predefined in a few ways. You'll see another thing that in our UI, I can change things like the category that's been predefined here. In the future, these are going to be automatically mapped for a lot of users, or for a lot of security standards. So while we're delivering something that's very customizable, and say if I want to change the category um, and use something different, or want to indicate multiple categories for system integrity, systems protection, I can do that. In the future, we just want all of these things to be predefined for customers so that everything's already automatically mapped to something like a PCI standard or like a FISMA standard. And we're going to be doing that in partnership with NIST, and they're going to help us drive how some of that aligns to a cybersecurity framework. So I'm actually just going to select NIST as one of my standards here, standard provider around CSF, and I'm going to select my control here, and so let's also say this is enforced. Well, apparently this cluster is not automatically propagating everything. So let's see. It said I need a binding here. Well, that showing up. Yeah, for some reason my placement binding did not Oh, it didn't automatically populate because I skipped over selecting my cluster. So that was a simple oversight on my part. So, assuming I had everything uh, filled out, the write down the list, and if I hadn't jumped around there, I would not have tripped up that policy. But in short, when you create your policies, they propagate and filter back up to your dashboard. Um, my check is set pretty slow right now, but hopefully with a quick refresh here, we'll get all set again. And in short, that's our main mechanism to now defining policies, to having this extensible framework be more out of the box, tailored to various customer use cases and industry standards. Um, and as far as remediation, as I pointed to, the main enforcement actions we take today are all focused on if something is violating the policy, that container should not be running or should be killed or restarted. That's the level of remediation that we're performing at today. But for our future state, this is where our integrations to CEM, to tooling like QRadar, various other pieces of the security pack, and even to tooling with third-party providers, uh, that's where we're going to be having a greater set of remediation actions, remediation capabilities that you can take from the dashboard and from your particular policies. Another area where we'll be diving further in the future is really securing your applications. A lot of what's happening here is really focused at the cluster level. And a lot of these security services are built really for your clusters, but with our increasing capabilities in application lifecycle management, we definitely want to make sure that we can surface and get deep visibility with policies on any issues that happen in our applications, and that we can remediate those as well. So there's more to come in the future. We've kind of reviewed the new features and the new capabilities that have come out with the multi-cloud management version 1.1 pack. So, before I uh, go on any further, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, and I know we had a number of questions pop up in the chat box. So I wanted to take some time to try to go through some and to see what we can answer and what kind of information you all are still looking for. So I'll pop out of here, take a look at the chat, and also see what's unanswered, what kind of information you all are still looking for. Um, so these features are, and I see Scott already got to this, are going to be the unique differentiators in the multi-cloud management pack. And like I was getting at before, these are really going to be focused on securing your managed clusters, but also securing your applications or your workloads that that the multi-cloud management pack is going to help you with, that the cloud pack for apps will help you with, because this tooling is really built on uh, our our viewpoint, our use of Kubernetes, and started with ICP. So this is really kind of the jumping off point. But our security services, our policies are obviously supporting OpenShift under the covers. So if you have a cluster of OpenShift, these will work and will be configurable in extended environments as well. Yeah, let me see. I think that kind of gets at the main thing. The the extensible framework is obviously part of the value in the back end, but the bigger value that we're delivering now and that we're delivering in the future are the out of the box policies. Those libraries are going to grow, and that's really where we're going to have a lot more value to keep delivering and to keep growing on in future quarters. It's going to come from policies of libraries that are deployable out of the box that you can say do a check or an assessment against to say, do I meet this library of policies or not? That kind of level of reporting as well is going to be where we go in the future with this. So there will be more to come, and I'm happy to take any other questions if anybody has anything. But I'll just take a pause there and see if folks have any thoughts or any comments. Susie Bilkes, is there anything else you all wanted to cover or see? Just with the time that we have left.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was unable to mute. I don't know what happened there. I don't see any other questions. If there is anything anyone wants to ask, rather than type it in the chat area, you can feel free to please unmute yourself and ask the question so we can give another 2 minutes. If
Please feel free to catch me on Slack is always
Yes.
the easiest. Oh,
Can you hear?
yes. Hi, Piero.
Yeah. The question is because in your demo, I've seen there was a problem with binding with the cluster. The question that came to me is define a policy and then use that policies later for different cluster. I mean,
Yes, and in fact
uh,
that was one thing that in that UI where you're selecting the various elements of your policies, you can apply it to multiple clusters when you're setting up the policy, or if you need to edit the policy. Um, there's various ways that you can kind of take care of that. So, when you're creating, if you just need it on one cluster, you can select that. Or you can select multiple clusters up front. And all of those you see they populated right down there. So that'll take care of deploying to multiple clusters. Um, and if you need to, and so that one created easily. If you needed to edit that policy, um, and it's probably on my third page, but if you needed to also edit, you could do it directly from your terminal, or if I was connected here, this might take a minute to connect. I could do a kubectl command, and I could say kubectl edit policy. I stick in the policy name, the namespace, uh, and then I can just dictate uh, where else, what other clusters would need to have that policy, or if it's some other change to the policy, you can make those if you know the commands and kind of have a knowledge of the template behind the policy. You can make all of those changes either during or after the policy has been deployed.
Sorry, I'm not sure I correctly understood. If I'm the security man that defined the security policies, I create the policy, and later on, when a cluster is defined, I want to bind that cluster to that security policy. That can in the UI or as I understood, I have to use kubectl command to bind that policies to that customer,
Right.
that cluster.
Yep. Both
Okay.
both paths both paths are supported.
Sorry, I have another question, because on Monday I have a customer meeting where I want to present this policy framework. The other question is about, let's say, event management can is managed to input events to the security operation center. I mean, if supposing that I have a security alert driven the policy, this event I understood can be pulled to the security operation center. It is something that I can define in the UI or how it works. You can.
Yes, and the path to being able to do that includes a few parts, which, if you think back to our larger architecture, right, we're defining the policies with the hub on the managed clusters, but in the back end, there's a few things that would need to be configured to be able to forward all the security and policy information out to an SOC. So what would need to be configured, the audit logging service would need to be on and configured during installation or afterwards. In addition to that, you know, when we're setting up our policies, we want to make sure that they're forwarding to the audit logging service. So one thing we can do is send all of that information out, or capture it all in a log, and the output, the information from the logs, can be forwarded or integrated to other systems or tools. So, you know, if you needed a feed of that information going out to an SOC, and, you know, there was tooling at the operations center to consume that data,
Okay.
that's where all of that would need to be integrated. And today, you know, the integrations that we support are things like QRadar and Splunk. So there are,
Okay.
yeah, there are more things we'd want to support in the future, but you know, there is a story that more supporting that. And if you do want to talk about that deeper, yeah, I'm happy to, you know, talk about it over email, and we can pull in our
Okay.
security architect as well to give you more help in the story.
Okay, thank you. I understand that it is used the audit logging framework to interact with the security operation center.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Okay.
where we do all
If
that.
I have a,
Yep, no problem.
okay, if I have a further question, I will reach out to you directly. Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so again, everybody, if anybody has additional questions, please unmute yourself and speak. We lost Bilky. She had an issue with her PC, Nick, but somehow the system made me the host, so we are still fine. Okay, I guess there weren't any additional questions. So Nick, thank you so much for this great session. I got some feedback on Slack already, so I think this is a really important and interesting topic, and I really appreciate the update on this.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Susie. The slides will be up shortly. I'm sure Bilkis has them. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to anybody. Thank you all for the time.
Take care.